Got it. Okay, beautiful.
Good evening. I couldn't find it anywhere. You know how I found out it was tonight? I looked on my calendar and it says 7:30, Jeff.
Well, you know what? It's on there.
And I called up to find out because I spoke to Samantha who got me the information.
Yeah.
Anyway, real quick if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You do not have to react, respond, or say anything about what I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Having dinner with the Schmeidlers this week.
Yes, yes.
Who are very, very close to
Sure.
David.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what the
I already had a conversation.
Huh?
I already had a conversation.
That's it, okay.
She just signed a new 5-year contract. She got going.
That's unfortunate.
And she's a beautiful, wonderful kid. She's probably not the right fit.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
I'm glad you're honest.
Yeah.
And having said that.
She's delightful. I love her to death.
Yeah, see, I've known her since she was a little kid.
Yeah. Anyway, hi Minna. You're muted, Minna. You're muted. Which is ironic for you.
It certainly is. We are all gonna try very hard not to talk about Tracy's email. How do we do that? How do we not talk about Tracy's email?
We just don't do it. Tracy's email, God bless Tracy, we love her to death, and she, had an offer that she couldn't refuse.
No, it's good for her. It's good for her, right?
It sucks for us, but we're thrilled. It's it. It's all what
I
it
feel
is.
badly for you because you have to start, all over again. Well,
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I will tell you. Look at these. Look at who the cat dragged in. Here. I'm just going to give out to our people coming in here. I have nice handouts for you. I take care of my people. I take care of my people.
I'm so grateful.
You know what? I'm grateful you're here.
I thought this wasn't happening.
Why?
Because there are no people.
That's okay.
No, but you know what? We hope we get some people online. It's it's that time of year. People have that. Everybody's busy with their Christmas parties, etc. You never know.
Yeah, it's also
Christmas parties is hilarious.
is that Sheila? Sounds like Sheila.
Jeff, you have been here.
Sheila, it's Minna. Hi, sweetie.
No. Oh my God.
Yeah.
We have Sheila, we have Andy, we have Tom, we have 500,000. It's beautiful.
It's a million.
And we have a portion of our small group.
That's right. I have a lot of reading to do for Sunday.
Huh? Yeah, me too.
For our Temple book group.
Which is your book group?
We're reading In Her Own Words by Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh my God.
And then we're going to go on to, we hope to go on
Sunday,
to Larry
this Sunday, the 19th.
This Sunday.
At your
Coming
house.
home.
It's very good. It's a great book. It's a great book.
I was really worried about that because I knew it was at my house.
Yes, Ina.
Yes,
Ina.
yes.
So how do you get,
It's Minna. Hello, sweetie.
Hi, I see you. I see you every time I come on to the temple.
Then I'll see if I have any other
Oh, the
participants.
Gordons, hello Gordons.
The Gordons are here. Let's see.
Carol Schaff is here.
We have Carol. I'm gonna move you guys over here. The participants list, and I have somebody else, whoever that is. We have Michelle Greenberg. It's very exciting. Very exciting. We're gonna get a minion. I'm telling you right now.
Sheldon.
I started with 400 people, and now I'm down to a minion. It's okay. I'm not bitter.
The hardcore is here.
You know what? It's
The
fine.
hardcore.
It's all good. We're going to study community. It's going to be great. It's all good. I'm going to give it the professorial 5 minutes, and then we'll start. Is that okay? And we'll be done by 8:30. I'm going to guarantee you.
I got plenty of time.
Yeah, I haven't had dinner yet. Come on.
Pretend it's a coat, or it's the one where we have to, it's in Tuscola, where we have to spend all night studying.
Spread on that. That's Shabuo. You're close. You're so close.
Not good.
Andy, you're this
I was this close. It was one of those S holidays.
Yes, all
Yeah,
right.
it is.
Why is it,
I wish I had.
why is it that,
that?
do I have to tune on something to be seen, or, because I see Andy's not.
No, Andy, what do you mean? You're seen.
I don't
You're,
know.
look, you're right there. Come on. You're right in the middle.
Oh,
We see you.
Come You're there. If you talk, you'll be seen.
Not that I'm not.
And we have 2 hours, meaning 2 of these remote camera sound things, they pick you up wherever you are. It almost works for cover Torah when I have around, usually we have how many? We usually have around 15 to 18 in the room,
And
another 25 online. So it works.
Oh, it most certainly does.
Yeah. And all my colleagues complain about it. I think it's great. Anyway, were you guys able to find the actual handout online and stuff? On the, Minna, you weren't able, but somebody sent it to you, right?
Jane sent it to me. Yeah, by the way, the link for tonight's, what's it called? Publication, the week's events at Temple, had the link for this evening.
Oh, it did. Good.
I couldn't find it anywhere.
You couldn't find it? It was there. I just saw it.
Oh,
I just saw it, yeah.
Myself? Yeah.
No, it's there.
But we just got it 10 minutes ago, right?
All right.
Anyway, Sheila, I'm sorry.
I asked you that.
She's coming along.
Yeah,
What time
You
is
know,
it? I'm gonna give it 2 more minutes, guys. Just 2 more minutes as we have people, we have sounds of people joining on. Sounds of people.
is she walking?
Oh, the Zabos.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's still good for Sunday and everything.
Okay, because I was gonna say that if you would prefer to have the meeting at your house,
We are.
you are having a meeting at your house.
Right.
Oh, Andy just told me it was at my house.
We have a scheduled your. You invited us.
Oh, so we're having the meeting at your house.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay, that's fine. Either way,
You're making it up as you go along, Tom.
I'll do it the next time.
Look, we have all these people. It's how lovely is that?
No,
All right.
I have a feeling it should be at your house because
Well, if you want to come to Florida, you're welcome to come here.
We do it, I know you're saying we can do it at your house. I love that.
Yeah, the weather is great, and you could see your grandson.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Rabbi, the sound is about 400 times better than last month.
The sound is good right now?
Yeah, I can hear everyone on Zoom and,
Nice.
in the temple. It's great.
You know what? It's because everybody here talks with a beautiful, mellifluous voice.
Yeah,
That's
and
what it
there's,
is.
but there's no echo. There was a terrible echo. There's no echo.
Excellent. So let's start. If everybody has the handout, right, we're going to be in the first page in a minute. A lot of this, for those of us who have been around Temple, will be somewhat of a review or a refresher. But it's a really important refresher because it's part of our progression of coming home. How is Judaism our journey home? And it's about the home we create as a temple community. How does congregational life help us create a covenant or a community that feels like home? And of course, the operative word for me will be covenant. It's not no secret, but that means something very unique, and to understand what that means is crucial. So if you think about the synagogue or the congregation you belonged to when you were a kid, when you were growing up, and if you could describe it, in a word, by saying what the most important thing that happened in that congregation was, what would you say? Could be anything, by the way.
You can why?
I know, what's the most important thing growing up in your congregation?
I didn't have a congregation. My
I
parents.
have it. I'm not gonna ask you. Somebody else.
I had. But I have one now.
Oh, wait. Tom has one. Say it again.
For me, it was the Sunday school. That's all, we went to services every once in a while and the high holy days.
So Sunday school, religious school. Educating the kids, I would call that Torah. Go ahead, anybody else?
I got a phrase. Harold Saperstein's travelogue sermons.
So Andy just said Harold Saperstein's travelogue sermons, meaning he grew up with Rabbi Harold Saperstein, on Long Island,
Temple Emmanuel of Lynbrook.
right, in Lynbrook, so it was about the rabbi's teaching. Also Torah, all right? Somebody else. If you grew up at Temple Emmanuel of Yonkers with Rabbi Abraham J. Klausner, like in part Bob Immerman did, you would have said that the most important thing was
The rabbi.
the rabbi and worship. Worship.
And the rabbi would have said he was the most important thing too.
The poet laureate, Rabbi Abraham J. Klausner. So different things, right? Anybody else have an experience? John, what's your experience growing up? Do you have one?
Well, I have one.
All right, Sheila.
Well, I grew up, I didn't really grow up in the synagogue because I was a girl, but my father went to Anshe Sholem, and I would say the big word was fear.
Fear.
So fear, I'm going to call that fear or awe. Awe. I'm going to be nice.
It was more
And what was the fear of? What was the fear of?
everything.
Fear of everything.
Yes.
Was it, all right, Anshe Sholem like Nusha.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have yeah, John?
Well, I grew up in a conservative synagogue in Baltimore, so it's very different. But unlike what Minna said, the most important person was the cantor
Oh,
because he ran the service with an iron hand. He was an Austrian,
service.
And in fact, he was like the voice of God. You didn't argue with him.
Okay, all right. Now, some of us didn't grow up in congregational life. Some of us came to it later in life. That's all good, and it's wonderful. How is the idea of congregation framed in classical Judaism? The book that's our reference tonight is this wonderful book called Rethinking Synagogues by Rabbi Larry Hoffman, A New Vocabulary for Congregational Life. It was sort of Rabbi Hoffman's postscript on his movement of transforming synagogue life called Synagogue 2000. He created a transformation effort that was a whole movement starting in 1995, 94, 95, that went to 98 and really kicked in. We were one of the first cohorts of 18 congregations around Westchester, and this book is the sort of book report in 2006 or 7 on this process, and he frames what a congregation classically, how it was understood. So take a look. I'm going to have Minna read this if she would. It starts, synagogues are traditional.
okay. You have to forgive me, I'm reading from my iPhone because you're not putting it on the screen, okay? Synagogues are traditionally conceived as providing 3 basic activities: prayer, study, and gathering. Though admittedly a gross oversimplification, the traditional triad is nonetheless useful, if only because it parallels the 3 concepts generally regarded as the pillars of the Jewish project: God, Torah, and Israel. Don't we have 3 different ones in our covenant, Jeffrey? All right, we'll talk about that.
We do, but these are the foundation stones Hoffman correctly would identify with congregation or synagogue or community life.
We can imagine synagogues taking different shapes as a direct consequence of the way we weigh the relative values of God, Torah, and Israel.
Because what are synagogues called? The 3 words in Hebrew? Sometimes they're called a Beit Tfilah, which is a house of prayer. Sometimes they're called a Beit Midrash, which is a house of study. And sometimes they're called a Beit Knesset, which is a house of gathering. Those are the 3 words, and that is God, Torah, Israel. The 3 primary purposes of synagogue life. Keep it going a little more. The
founder of Reconstructionism, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, thought them all equal and argued for synagogues that did them in equal measure. The conservative movement implicitly rejected his even-handed approach as contrary to its own emphasis, which was Torah, classical Reform Jews underscored God. True, in the heady civil rights days of the 50s, 60s, they emphasized social justice, but overall, Reform temples have been best known for the majesty of their worship, the centrality of their sanctuaries, and even their scholarly forays into theology.
Right, if you look at a Reformed congregation, the center of any Reformed congregation built in the 40s, 50s, 60s especially, is the sanctuary. That was the pride and joy, because they were all Beit Tfilah. They were houses of prayer. That's how they created community. Hoffman is now going to say something very different that came out of the Synagogue 2000 movement for transformation. Go ahead.
Eventually, our ideas for Synagogue 2000 crystallized into the ideal of synagogue as sacred community, like the desert sanctuary of the Exodus, the Mishkan. The entire purpose of synagogue life would be to fashion a place where God quite evidently dwells.
So I don't know why he wrote that way, but Hoffman is a funny writer sometimes. So the question becomes, how do we create a community where God dwells? You remember the famous story. The Kotzker Rebbe interrupts and asks his disciples one Shabbos morning, where does God dwell? And they start arguing amongst themselves. Doesn't the Rebbe know? The whole world is filled with God's glory. Finally, he interrupts their argument and he says, my students, learn the lesson. God dwells wherever you let God in. So how do we let God in to help God be the foundation stone? Whatever we think God is, by the way, don't get disturbed or sidetracked by the G word, right? God can be lots of different things. How do we let God in to a community? Turn the page. Go to the back side of the second, or page 2. The key roots in any Jewish community is Kadosh, Kuf Daled Shin. Name a word that has that at its root. Don't look at this yet. You can be looking at it, but don't look. Name any word that has Kuf Daled Shin as its root. Minute.
Kaddish.
Kaddish. The prayer that we say when somebody passes away. Okay. What else?
Kiddush.
Kiddush. The glass we raise. The Kiddush cup. The wine we bless. Give me another one.
Ishka.
Say it again. You're close. Not kishka. Kishka is not a Kaddish word. No. Kishka is a delicious delicacy that I love. A little gravy. But no. So how about this one? Kiddushin. The word in Hebrew for wedding. How about mikdash? The portable sanctuary that was in the tabernacle in the middle of the people of Israel.
What was that again?
Mikdash, right? How about Kedusha, the prayer for holiness that we say here. So what connects all these words? They are the foundation or the key to how we create a community where God dwells. Who wants to read? I'm going to make Andy Harrison read this because I know he's going to read it well. He's going to start here and then we may go to somebody online. Maybe John Bull.
A number of years ago?
Yeah, this is, by the way, Ron Wolfson from his book Relational Judaism, and he's quoting his rabbi, Ed Feld. Go ahead.
A number of years ago, I was celebrating Shabbat dinner with good friends who had just returned from Israel with the most wonderful souvenir. It was a Kiddush Fountain. The Hebrew word Kiddush from the root Kadosh literally means sacred. The silver device stood about 10 inches high and featured 2 tiers. The top tier was a single large Kiddush cup. On the bottom tier, 8 small Kiddush cups sat in a circle, each one positioned below a spout. Sounds like a chocolate fountain at a wedding reception. Time to recite the Kiddush prayer, the host filled the large Kiddush cup with wine, and with quite the flourish, poured it into a hole at the top of the fountain. Within seconds, the wine was distributed simultaneously to the 8 small Kiddush cups at the bottom tier, much to the delight of everyone at the table. It was both a communal and an individual experience filled with surprise and joy, creating a memorable moment of Jewish celebration, not just of Shabbat, but of the relationships around the table.
Right, we by the way, had 2 of them, depending on how many people were there, and my kids would invite, other friends, all of the 6th grade girls who are now all 25, but I call them the 6th grade girls, are still the same age to me. So there would be Carly and Sophia and Jesse and Leah. They'd be all around the table, and they couldn't wait until I would pour the wine, because it was grape juice, that would go in all the cups, because it was like absolutely fascinating. But the metaphor is what helps us understand what Kadosh means and how we create Kadosh. Go ahead.
Sharing holiness. We're sharing holiness.
Well, it's about sharing, coming from a single source, being funneled out to everyone.
When we are the in-between, when we are in the between with each other, we share a bond, a sacred bond. Rabbi Edward Feinstein teaches, a family, a circle of friends, gathers about the Shabbat or holiday table to share a celebration. A cup of wine is raised. The wine is not sacred, it's only Manischewitz after all. What is sacred, holy, are the bonds that gather us together to celebrate life. So together we recite a prayer called Kiddush.
So, again, notice what all of these things that we named before, that he's going to name now, what links them all. Okay, so we've got the first clue. We are bounded or bonded together to celebrate life. Go ahead, Andy.
2 individuals in love and devotion determined to share a lifetime together. A ring, whole and unbroken, is slipped onto the finger, signifying a commitment whole and unbroken. And words are spoken. Harei at mikudeshet li. You are kadosh to me. This rite that binds 2 lives together is called Kiddushin.
Right? 2 lives bounded or bonded together.
A loved one has died, and with tears we rise in the presence of community at prayer to declare that even the catastrophe of death cannot sever the bond that holds us together. This prayer is called Kaddish.
A bond that transcends life. Kaddish. Go ahead, Andy.
Kiddush, Kiddushin, Kaddish, Kadosh, Kedusha all mean holiness and all mean opening the self to embrace another, bonding with another, holding the other close, never letting go, making the other part of the self. We form around ourselves a circle of our intimate concern, the people we care for, the ones we define as ours. For some, the circumference of that circle is so narrow, it includes only the individual self, its diameter only reaching only to the end of the nose. For others, the circle includes family, community, nation. We worship a God whose circle of concern is infinite. Adonai Echad, God is the infinite circle of concern encompassing all.
So you can go back to what Hoffman challenged us to do. How do we create a community where God evidently dwells? Well, we make the circle as wide as possible. We understand, actually, that we're all bonded or bound together. That our difference doesn't really separate us. Or that we're all part of one entity. We all share in a bond. We could call it God. We could call it connection. We could call it covenant. It's kadosh. It bonds us together. What's the opposite in Hebrew of kadosh? I will tell you, and this is a great revelation, that anybody here love the beach? Raise your hand if you love the beach. I grew up in Salisbury Beach, right? When I was a little kid. I don't know why all the Jewish people, Jewish old couples, this is probably how you think your grandparents were old when they were 60. They weren't old. All the Jewish old couples would rent these like, they were sort of apartments, but they were like in houses, like 3 levels, right on the beach and go down. But it wasn't fancy. It was very not fancy because they could afford it. I would play on this in the sand all the time. And I learned that sand did not form unless you put water in it to mold it, right?
With lousy sandcastle, there's no water.
Lousy sandcastle. My daughter recently sent, among the 8 or 18 presents to Sawyer, her nephew, this sand that is moldable, that you don't have to put water in. And you can put it in dinosaur-like molds, and it comes out and it stays together. It's brilliant. But if you try to pick up sand, what do you notice about sand?
Amorphous.
It is amorphous, it is diffuse. The opposite of kadosh is sand. Andy, give us the rest of this. It's so good.
Okay.
What is the opposite of holiness?
Kiddushim Tihiyu, you shall be holy. This is the highest spiritual aspiration of Jewish life. Open up the self, draw your circle wider and wider until it approaches the infinity of God's circle. What is the opposite of holiness? In Hebrew, the opposite of kadosh is whole, translated as profane or ordinary. Whole literally means sand. Who knew? Sand has no cohesion, no connection, no bonds. When you are in a relationship, you share a bond with the other. It's this world of whole sand, of atomized individuals, of sovereign, lonely, unconnected selves that you come to community to escape. When you tire of being a consumer, you seek intimacy, friendship, trust. When you weary of transactional relationships, you seek belonging. When Jewish institutions become places of sacred community, you discover Kadosh.
Right? So, Hoffman used to teach this in the late 90s in Synagogue 2000. I know Hoffman's stuff very well. Why? We were a Synagogue 2000 congregation. And then I read all of Hoffman's stuff. And then Rabbi Hoffman tapped me to be him, to replace him in a Boston-based 5-synagogue consortium of a small or 6 synagogue of a cohort to be the retreat teacher for 2 retreats a year for 3 years, where I taught Synagogue 2000, in essence. So what is Hoffman saying to us here? He's saying, when you're a CVS, a consumer value synagogue, what do you think? You think you put down your money, you get 2 weddings, 3 bar mitzvahs, and a funeral. And that's what you're getting for your dues. That's transactional Judaism. But transformational Judaism is money doesn't buy you anything. Yes, it may make you a member, and by the way, Larchmont Temple doesn't care. You want to give us $18, great. You want to give us whatever the full freight is? That's even better. It doesn't matter. It's about bringing yourself to the table. So we want to create a community that is not transactional, but covenantal. Think about, honest question, I'm going to ask for answers. If you could think about the last, call it the last 10 years, but it could be 20 years of temple life for you. It can be any moment. Name a Kadosh moment for you. A moment that felt Kadosh. Don't use the word holy, because that is a little disorienting. What's a Kadosh moment for you? And you don't have to tell us even why. Based on your understanding of Kadosh being intimacy, interconnection, bonding, a life that goes beyond death, the intrinsic support we bring to each other, the sacred community that we get when we share life. Do you have a Kadosh moment? Andy has one.
I have 2. One is familial and one is more communal.
Okay.
The familial, of course, would be the bar and bat mitzvah of our 2 children, how verklempt my wife and I felt at that moment. And I think, you're going to laugh, but the progressive dinners that Brotherhood and Sisterhood, remember Sisterhood, used to run together.
I love that.
And there was this mutual effort The brotherhood would schlep everything to the host families' homes. The sisterhood would cut up the chicken and make sure there were enough green beans in every package. And then we'd all meet at temple for hors d'oeuvres and music and dancing afterwards. And it was a truly joint effort by both organizations, which many of us
I love that.
mourn the
Love
loss
that.
of.
Yeah, but don't mourn, celebrate, right? But I think, so that's a very good and very different understandings of what Kadosh might be. Anybody else have a Kadosh moment?
The two trips that we took in the 82 and 84, I think that that's not too far back, to celebrate the bat mitzvah of my daughters with the temple trip.
All right, you're talking about Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, Israel trips as a congregation, okay? It could be a long time, or it could be recent. Sheila.
So many of them.
Pick one. Pick two.
My grandchildren's bat mitzvahs, but the really big one was just about 5 years ago, the last time that my husband got up the high holy days and held the Torah.
Wow, yep,
That
was a Kadosh moment. Yep, Peter holding the Torah, yep.
And the women's seders, and there were millions of things.
Okay, but, okay, somebody else give me, I'll take a couple more. Minute.
What
Bob
about,
Sorry.
I know, hold on one sec. A minute, go ahead.
the three
Bob
brothers?
Shiva.
Wait,
The fact that, of course, the usuals, dear friends and family, of course they were there. Would have been unusual if they weren't. But people came who I barely knew. I know a lot of people in Temple. People came who I barely knew, and they came because we're a Temple community. And when there's a Shiva, you come. It was very, very moving.
Outpouring of care for some person, one person, Bob, so dear to you, but clearly people felt connected and the loss was shared, right? Right, beautiful, I know.
Well, I was going to say, our three bar mitzvahs, being on that bima with my family and having my family with me the entire day and weekend actually was something, an out-of-body experience. And the second thing I must mention is three things. First, our first trip to Israel. There is nothing that compares to your first trip to Israel. And second, my granddaughter's baby naming in our synagogue. I mean, these are experiences that are really extraordinary.
All right, so beautiful, I couldn't agree more. So, does anybody have a moment they think is different than these decided moments? I want to make a point, but Andy already made my point. But if you have a different moment.
I always think about, for some reason, when it's Kol Nidre and the Kol Nidre prayer when everyone is there, always feels very special to me.
Very powerful, very kadosh, very kadosh. First of all, you've all named things I knew you would name. They are sort of high moments of either family or community ritual and rites, right, for the most part. Right, Jerry, did you have a different kind of one? No, you started on mute. No?
I don't know if it's different. I would just say that when the Ida storm came and kind of wiped out people in Mamaroneck, I was just super impressed with our social action committee and how quickly they sent out a plea for help and how quickly it was answered.
Well, Jerry exactly read my mind, because I was going to say my most recent Kadosh moment was our community response to the most recent devastation of the storm. What was the right? And the recent storm, which was, what the heck was it?
Ida.
Was that Ida? Right? So that, it wasn't here, but it was our people. So I went to St. Thomas's Church on Mamaroneck Avenue, on Boss Post Road, to drop off a bunch of stuff and to give a check to my colleague, who I'm blanking on her name. She's great, a great minister. And I walked into their giant social hall, and it was covered in the whole floor with donations. And who were the kids running in the donations? 4 of our kids. And then I saw like 3 of our social action committee members sorted among like 10 people. And I felt like, oh my God. So Kadosh doesn't have to be your prototypical prayer or mourning or celebratory moment. It's a moment, Kadosh is a moment that we recognize bonds beyond the commonly held, oh yeah, they're in my family, yeah, they're in my friend group. So when the circle radiates out and we realize we are all part of this universe and we're all here to take care of each other. That to me is the ultimate Kadosh moment. It's the opposite of chol, which is sin. How do you say secular in modern Hebrew? Chiloni. What's the root of secular? Same. Chol. The same word. When you're kadosh, you're connected. How do you create a congregation that's truly connected? Turn the page. Turn the page.
We don't have it.
This is more Hoffman. Yeah, you're on page 3. Isn't it good I numbered the page? I never numbered the pages. Yeah, thank you. So Dave Zabel, get ready. So this is a little section, and it's a little dated, but not really. Why do I know this? You know that we recently, Cantor recently sent a letter. I've sort of understood this might happen for a little bit. And I know that I love Tracy dearly. I think the feeling's mutual. I know it is. And, she is going to be going to one of the preeminent congregations in America. And I believe she's one of the preeminent cantors in America. We will get a great cantor. We put on, or we didn't put on, I put on our application to the American Conference of Cantors, and I included they wanted a mission statement. And instead of some mission statement, I gave them the Congregational Covenant, which we'll see soon, and it has a bunch of my cartoons on it. And I gave them a piece of this literature, which you're going to read in 1 second. I gave them my definition of what a congregation means, which is a covenant community. And we already got back a number of applicants in less than a day. I mean, like, I don't know, a dozen, which is crazy. It's lovely. One of them commented, I've never seen this definition before. It's never. So the truth is, we're not unique, but to hold this as a foundation of your community means everything, and I think leads to a community that feels like home. Go with the capital employed, Dave. It's that middle paragraph.
Capital employed in most synagogues as they are now constituted is programs. That is what synagogues invest in. It is how they measure worth. Programs attract dues and members. If the synagogue operated with the sacred as its capital, it would still have programs insofar as they are the delivery vehicle for what the synagogue does. But the programs would be driven by the capital synagogue recognizes, not the money people pay to attend them, but the degree of the sacred that the program embodies. For synagogues, sacred capital is an idea whose time has come.
Right, so it's not about, programs, as Ron Wilson says, it's about people. What's the most important kadosh activity that I do on a daily basis? Schmoozing.
Meet with people.
Schmoozing.
Eating with people. I had 4 coffees today. One was with a congregant who's dealing with the extended mourning of a loss. One was with a parent whose kid's thinking about college and they're not sure about where and what. One was with a rabbi who grew up in our congregation, who's now a first-year rabbi in the field. He was my youth group president. And one was with a new congregant who wanted to hear more about the community.
More about what?
Schmoozing. I schmooze with people. It's about relational Judaism. It's not about programs. Our programs are great. You can have all the bells and whistles you want, right? But if you're not meeting people where they live and addressing the questions that are most urgent for them or the concerns that are at the core of their being, what are you doing? That is not a community. So now, keep going, Dave.
Can I just say one thing?
Okay.
I think the leader, the rabbi, the leader of the congregation is a very important part of belonging to a congregation. The people, yes, and the people who are the leaders. That is very important.
I think you're right, but I will tell you this. A congregation with a bunch of leaders and a rabbi that doesn't have members who are in consort with them,
Doesn't work.
Oh, yeah, you're right, but you take what?
not going to be a sacred community, honey. All right, Dave, keep going. Give us the next paragraph.
If we cannot measure sacred capital by a listing of programs, we'll have to look for it somewhere else. Sacred community then is dedicated to certain tasks, but these can only be realized in a sacred ambience, not in the market community where people weigh value by the list of limited liability deliverables if they think their dues are buying. The synagogue is a place for pursuing Torah, worshiping God, sacralizing relationships, healing the sick, feeding the poor. It is a place where we know the presence of God because we honor each other as made in God's image. The synagogue is not a building. It is a set of sacred relationships that constitute the community and the equally sacred acts that flow from it.
That was the bold line that I included at the top of our covenant of membership with a little cartoon in our application for a new campus. Why? Larchmont Temple is a great building. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. People feel very special to be in this space. However, what has the pandemic taught us?
It's the community, not the building.
It's the community.
Here at all.
That's why the rabbi's good. The cantor's really good. The people where they live are the key to any congregation. We create community by affirming the connection we share that transcends the place. That's the key, which is why, keep it up, finish your up, Dave, real quick, the sacred community.
Reinforces connectedness and overcomes alienation. Its worth is measured in the sacred acts and relationships that connect us to one another, evoking respect, reverence for each other's stories, mutual care, good deeds, and love.
So the idea that we know each other, a synagogue, a community, a covenant community, is a place where people are known, where their voice is heard, where they belong because they're accepted for who they are, with all the flaws and foibles that each of us carry.
So I wanted, in that vein,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the once popular, maybe it's still popular, Chavurah movement.
Yes.
A series of couples, I remember when my children were young, sort of break away from the synagogue in order to have their own little private gathering, and they somehow managed to get their kids bar mitzvahed with a contract rabbi or a rabbi who's part of the Chavurah, but there's no institution.
Right.
It doesn't do, in my view, it doesn't do anything to preserve Jewish communal life, which is what the synagogue is all about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are Chavurot still a thing? Are they still?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a good question. We have in our own community different manifestations of that. And I would say beyond our community. And there are some pockets of Jewish life where there are small, sort of home-based community organizations.
Yeah.
Our former rabbi created one, which is an interesting, I think, innovation called, what's it called? A sanctuary. But what's most interesting to me is Larry Hoffman, because he's so brilliant, he understood something. Larry Hoffman went to, what's the guy's name? The megachurch guy in the West Coast.
The There's so many of them.
You know what his name is. No, not, is it Tim? Not Tim. What the heck's his name? The mega church guy. I'm blanking his name. Doesn't matter.
Crystal Cathedral.
Doesn't matter. So he has this mega church, 3,000 members. The first time you drive in, you get given a list. What's the list? It's all the affinity groups. The second time you drive in and you come to church, you are asked to join an affinity group. So Hoffman and Wolfson, Ron Wolfson, the co-creator of Synagogue 2000, saw that. And what did they do? They said, that's exactly what we're going to do. So they created the small group movement. So what do we have in Larchmont Temple? We are the second cohort of small group congregations in our movement. And now there are 4 or 5 cohorts. But we were among 12 different congregations around the country that created small groups 7 years ago. We now have 26 small groups. They are each chavarot. But here's the difference. They're not a disconnected, self-contained entity. They are in that, how many of you guys belong to small groups? Anybody? All right, what's your small group?
A book group and a Shabbat services and dinner group.
Book group,
Having difficulty.
Shabbat service and dinner group. All right, Sheila. Book group. Tom.
the same group.
Book group. Dave. Dave.
Which the Shabbat dinners and the cultural conversation.
Cultural conversations with the Straight Gate Church and Shabbat dinners. Minna.
A book discussion and a poetry group.
Oh, poetry book discussion. Excellent. Right? We have biking. We have hiking. We have walking. We have stories. We have baking.
Scotch.
We have drinking. The Hebrews. All right? So what connects all these groups? They are part of temple life. And at some point during the year, they all link up. They're also given, I don't know how many people use it, questions to connect them to the congregational learning theme that they can use or not use. So why is this important? Because we've created a Chavarah movement within the congregation. What creates this sacred connection that we just read about? Thinking small. In the past year, Larchmont Temple has, without trying, gained over 80 households. That's nuts. We went down after with the pandemic, we went down to around 760 households from 800, and we're now at 847 households.
God.
That's wonderful. But what's the challenge?
To keep everybody connected.
To keep it small, right?
Excellent. Beautiful. Ina and Minna, you both have spoken MS. You've spoken the truth.
You know, Jeffrey, years ago, I think you were here. I can't even remember a time when you weren't here, but there used to be a time when you weren't here because I'm older than you. And we had Havrot.
You did. It was right before I came. It was right before I came.
I don't know who figured it out, but about 12 or 14 people met once a month, not with a common topic, biking or hiking or drinking. It was just if you were in the congregation, you were eligible. And many of us made wonderful connections with that group. That's where I met Rita because she was in my Havarah. So it was.
Started in 1981, and they went until 1990, 2 years into my tenure. Rabbi Poehler thought they were great, but had a problem with them. His problem was, how are they going to come back to temple? Meaning, what are they going to do that's going to make them lead them back to temple life? They're going to go do their own thing, and then what? So I don't feel that. I feel that anything we do in any Jewish home or connect people in a Jewish way, no matter where it is an extension of who we are as a community.
That's
And
exactly.
it's just fine. I don't have a monopoly on doing the right Jewish thing or on Jewish truth or on Jewish experience. Kadosh doesn't have to happen in the temple, in the synagogue. It happens any place where we are because our synagogue is the set of sacred relationships we share. How do we create this sacred relationships? It's all about covenant. 5 years ago, David Brooks, who I like a little less since I read his last book, but I still like David Brooks a lot. David Brooks wrote an article that I use to teach again and again and again. It's called How Covenants Make Us. Do you see that, Michelle? You see that article? Or the part of it?
Yep.
Take a look at this, read this. It is essential Brooks, and it speaks directly to what we try to create and why community can feel like home at Larchmont Temple.
In her new book, Commonwealth and Covenant, Marcia Paley of NYU offers a clarifying concept. What we want, she suggests, is separability amid situatedness. We want to create and explore and experiment with new ways of thinking and living, but we also want to be situated in loving families and embracing communities, thriving within a healthy infrastructure, providing us with values and goals. Creating situatedness requires a different way of thinking. When we go out and do a deal, we make a contract. When we feel situated within something as if we belong, we have made a covenant. A contract protects interests, but a covenant preserves relationships. A covenant exists between people who understand that they are part of one another. It involves a vow to serve the relationship that is sealed by love. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people. People in a contract provide one another services, but people in a covenant delight in offering gifts.
He goes on. Why do I love this so much? And what's the metaphor he's trying to understand? How is it we create a community based on covenant? What does it mean to do that? He's giving us the formula. He wrote this in 2016, by the way. What was going on in 2016 in America?
Boy. Don't ask.
Think about it. Think about it. You know what was going on. You know the disarray, the dissolution of society, right? Right? You know that, the presidential election and who was stepping up to the fore and, the rhetoric, right? And the vitriol that was being tossed around, right? So this was a very divisive, difficult time. And he wrote about covenants. And he uses what key text? Wherever you go, I will go.
Ruth, book of
The book of Ruth. What is the book of Ruth? It's the model book for those who choose Judaism. Ruth is the preeminent convert. It means she forms a relationship out of love with the Jewish people. That's what a congregation has to become, or tries to be. It is, wherever you go, Minna, I'll go. Wherever you're in pain, I feel your pain. Wherever you're celebrated, I'll celebrate with you. That's what a community, that's a covenant community means. It's not easy, but it's crucial. We started congregationally in 1948. Why did we begin? What was the foundation stone of Larchmont Temple? Were we a Beit Tefillah, a house of prayer? Were we a Beit Midrash, a house of Torah and study? Or were we a Beit Knesset, a house of community gathering?
I think the last.
Andy thinks the last, the house of community gathering.
They wanted a place to educate their children and have their sacred occasions.
Okay, all right. Take a look at the next page, which is a cover, a replica or facsimile of the cover from 1949, when they had just bought the building. That we're actually, are we in the building now? No, we're in the connector room. The building would be right there. But they just bought the building. They purchased the home. What was their purpose? I quoted the founding minutes of the meeting, that I have the minutes in my office, from 1948. The meeting was on Woodbine. Who here lives at 48 Woodbine? Anybody? You people? Okay, no. They were at Pearl and Arnold Belschutz's backyard. Pearl Belschutz was the first founding president of the temple. That's crazy. A woman president in 1948? Pretty cool. She was from South Africa. Was she from South Africa or her husband?
He was.
He was from South Africa. She was from not. She didn't have a South African accent. But they founded the congregation in order to give their children a place to learn what it meant to be Jewish in the post-war era, because they didn't want them to be so acculturated they would lose what it meant to be Jewish. That was the primary reason. Secondary was a place we can get together and feel comfortable, Beit Knesset. And third was, we want a place to pray together. High holy days, maybe we'll come on some Sabbaths, who knows. Worship is good, but we want to make sure our kids know what it means to be Jewish.
Well, I'll tell you something. When we bought our house, that was the first thing we looked for. Because then I tell people who want to meet people, join a synagogue because you will meet people. And
So I agree with you. Years ago, this congregation, when it was founded, was not a covenant community. It was a contractual community. It was transactional. That's okay. Because people wanted to connect, and they knew they wanted to belong to something that was their organization, their Jewish place. However, even back then, I've looked in the archives. They're great. By the way, the archives are 4 boxes with a bunch of pictures and books dumped in. It's a shame. We'll eventually get the archives together. That's a project for the next few years. The archives hold some amazing pictures. They're mostly black and whites. And Tom Landau, who you wouldn't know, is 144, right? Tom grew up here, was born into the congregation. Parents belonged here. And Tom may remember that on New Year, not Jewish New Year, but on New Year's Eve, what did the temple organize?
New Year's Eve party.
Where was the New Year's Eve party?
It was probably...
it was in the city.
In the city?
In the city.
I got
1950, 1951, 1952, there are pictures on the train. Metro North looked a lot different then. It was a fancy train. Everybody is dressed to the nines. There's like 10 couples going into the city. It's a temple event. It's Kadosh. It's a holy event. They're going to get plastered. They're going to have a good time.
The Brotherhood used to run trips to the Russian section of
Yeah,
Brooklyn.
they're all doing it because they're connected. They took their connection on the road. That is a covenant community. That's what it means to create covenant. Turn to the next page.
Oh, we got boxes.
This is the covenant of membership of Larchmont Temple. When we turned 70, 20 years after we created, I should say I helped to create, right? This temple, the covenant of Larchmont Temple, what we call the covenant of membership. What did we think it was important to do? When we turned 50, it was our Jubilee year. We created this covenant that you see in the box. Everybody sees that covenant in the box? If you read those words now, you realize they're sort of dated. They're a little transactional. I would change some of the words. And so in our 70th year, which amazingly is 4 years ago almost, we talked a lot about, should we write a new covenant of membership? And we decided as a board of trustees and leadership, no. This covenant is a timepiece. It represents from 1996 to 98 what we aspired our covenant to be. The covenant being the evolving relationship forged by the sacred purpose we share. The community has a role, the individual member has an obligation and a role, and in between is the bond we share, the betweenness, right? As Andy read before, living in the between. What does that betweenness represent? You see, as Minna noted, the covenant is based on Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. Torah, sacred learning, Avodah, spirituality, celebration, rite and ritual, prayer, and Gemilut Chasadim, extending our arms and our hands to help. But in the between is the key. If you see the middle column, imagine the community's on one side, the individual members on one side. What connects them? Relationship. Look at the bottom. Remember what we did last time? A little bit of I thou. I'm going to give you a little more I thou. Jerry, you want to read a little I thou?
Sure. Spirit is not in the I, but between I and thou. It is not like the blood that circulates in you, but like the air in which you breathe. Man lives in the spirit if he is able to respond to his thou. He is able to if he enters into relation with his whole being. Only in virtue of his power to enter into relation is he able to live in that spirit.
Ooh. Only in virtue of his power to enter into relation or relationship is he able to live in the spirit. What is, according to Buber, the betweenness that we share? It's where God is made real. In those moments when those kids were sorting out those backpacks and all the items that were delivered, in the moments when Kol Nidre is being sung, and we look around the sanctuary, and we see the people who are all there generations, and we see the people who aren't there anymore. In those moments when your kids became B'nai Mitzvah, or when, not at this place, but in your own home, Shiva was observed. I can remember standing in my living room, a very crowded space, when Susan died. And people I loved, and some people I didn't like that much, were all together. I loved them that night, because they were there for me, and to remember Susan. That is where God dwells. We create a covenant community, and God exists through the bond we share and the blessing we bring in relationship to each other. That is transcendent, priceless. So the last page, turn to the last page. The last page is an exercise I did with I did this exact thing at a retreat for staff and at a board retreat, must be 2.5 years ago. Yeah, almost, yeah, it's been that before the pandemic? Yes, before the pandemic. It was the fall before the pandemic. And we talked about, without the challenge of pandemic life, so how can LT best become and continue to be a covenant community? You can't rest on your laurels with this stuff. So what are the things we should do? Notice what I quoted as a guideline. The 6 Phases of Synagogue Success by Dr. Rob Weinberg, who was also a contributor to Synagogue 2000. Successful synagogues link people to what matters. Successful congregations are intentional, meaning they live their values. Successful synagogues regard members as part of a covenant. Oh, really? Successful synagogues build Jewish competence, meaning they want everybody to learn and grow. Successful synagogues are not bound by their building. Kadosh moments happen all the time, everywhere. And successful synagogues adapt and innovate, they continue to grow and evolve. So if you were gonna say, and now consider the pandemic, in these crazy times, to continue to serve and be a covenant community, what should we be thinking about doing? Maybe that we're not doing, or things that we are doing that you think we should emphasize or do more of? I'm ready. I have answers, by the way.
So this is David. I was going to say that it seems that it seems that there's a lacking in the world today, and it may also be something we can build upon, would be trust in one another. And trust also becomes caring about the common good.
Yeah, I love that. Love that, Dave. Love that. I mean, I think that David Brooks actually wrote directly about that, right? Because, and by the way, he wasn't being incidental or just using words. He was being very intentional in his words when he said, it's over here. I'll quote it, but you'll get what he said and why he said it. When he said,
The bottom of page 3.
Contract provide one another services, but people in a covenant delight in offering gifts. What was he talking about by contract? I make a deal with you.
Right.
You know who he was talking about.
Right.
He was trying to say we have to be in a covenant-connected place, this America. He was trying to say, actually, in a very patriotic way, that America is a place where people care about each other, not because of the party they're involved in, not because if they're red or they're blue, but because they're American, because they share a foundation, because they share a love of freedom for all. That's what he was trying to say in the article. So congregational life happens when we create a covenant community that's bound by a common trust and a common good. He said at the end of the article there.
I was only reading it. I wasn't absorbing it.
No, but you read it well. I will give you a few ideas that are on the table, unless anybody else has an idea. You notice what we just did. We just did, and we did the last one just a month ago. We did backyard conversations. We did 9 of them. Why? Because we wanted to show that Kadosh, holy moments, happen wherever we get together. So if I'm in the back of, the Greenberg's backyard, or the Harrison's backyard, I'm gonna go back on, where did you guys live?
Hall Avenue.
On Hall Avenue, right? 31.
31.
I remember,
Yeah, sure.
right? So if I'm in the back, so we were in backyards. We were talking with 12 couples or 12 different member units of the temple. It was a small group conversation. And what were we talking about? The last one we did was my backyard in October, the end of October. And it was a bunch of people getting together. They were all in their late 40s and early 50s, except for one person. And we were talking about, how are you? How's your family? That was it. Nothing else. Why was that a congregational event? Because we care. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Where you suffer, I will suffer. We wanted to show people that wherever they are in this pandemic, wherever their kids are, their grandkids, it matters to us. We were in the back of the Schellers house. Beautiful house on Larchmont Avenue, 191. And we talked with a bunch of 60-somethings and a couple 70-somethings. And all of us were talking about grandkids. Most of us, not all, but most all. And we were talking about our kids. And we were saying, I'm so glad I'm not my children. I don't know how they're doing. This is such a tough time to be a parent. and we were trying to be supportive of each other. You know, and some people didn't have grandkids, that was fine. They all, by the way, all of them had kids, and they were talking about how difficult it is for their kids to sort of find their footing in this world right now. That was a temple holy moment. Wherever we're there for each other and share our stories, that's where covenant lives. Next year, well, I'll give you an idea, because 3 people in 1 week said the same thing to me. Minna was one of them. Minna said, you know, it's been a while since in Hever Torah we used current modern Jewish stories to elucidate the Torah portion.
It's wonderful. Oh, it's wonderful.
Which we did for a whole year, 20th century Jewish literature. So somebody said that the same week that somebody else said, you know, I don't know, like, current Jewish authors and modern storytellers very well. We should really have storytellers. And somebody else said, you know what we should do as a board of trustees? We should spend time going to people's homes and just hearing small groups tell us where they came from, how they grew up, and their Jewish story. Those 3 things have convinced me that next year has to be, somehow our learning theme has to be, hey, have I got a story for you? That's what the theme should be. You tell me your story, I'll tell you my story, we'll share a good Jewish story. If we do that, I think we've done great things. We built covenant community. The other way to build covenant community is to show you're there for each other. So if you hear about a Shiva and you can be there, even if you don't know the person, and you can go and you feel comfortable, go. If you can't go, send a note, send a card, right? Last week and the week before, I did 3 funerals each of those 2 weeks. It's way too many funerals for a rabbi to do. But I'll tell you right now, those people know we love them. And they know the congregation loves them because people reached out to show they care. That's what creates covenant community. As Jerry just read, it's in the betweenness of relationship where God dwells. I am done talking. Does anybody have a question or a comment?
I just want to say that Minna and I probably joined the congregation at the same time, right, Minna? I know our children were bar mitzvahed a week apart.
You remember we traded dates, Ina? You needed a different date.
I do remember you telling me you're going to love it because it's the first time that you're going to be in a room with all and knowing all the people. But also, we don't even live in Amerenik anymore, but we come back to the temple because we feel it is really our home.
Because you know why? You know why? Because you're just absolutely affirming Rabbi Larry Hoffman's definition. A synagogue is not a building. It is the set of sacred relationships that the members share and the evolving acts that grow from it. That's what it is.
And so far, you know, every time I come, I see the people I know, even though I haven't seen them in many months because I'm not living there. But
I know, you know, you could just perpetuate a fib and you could say, no, I'm on Walton Avenue. I'm just up the street. Nobody would know I know. You don't have to worry about it. We're not going to hold it against you. Folks, I want to tell you what I taught at post-confirmation was what's so Jewish about a white Christmas. So I leave you with this. To show you how Jews are at home in America, the most amazing, you know, the best-selling ever Christmas carol, over 100 million copies of the song sold, is White Christmas.
Irving Berlin, right.
Irving Berlin was Isaiah Balin, who came fleeing the Kishinev pogrom with his parents in 1911. He grew up on the Lower East Side. He was a singing waiter in New York City. He couldn't read music. He could compose, and he certainly wrote a good song. He wrote God Bless America. And in 1941, or 1938 actually, he wrote White Christmas. What's the backdrop to White Christmas? The first time it aired was 1941, December. It was 16 or 17 days after Pearl Harbor. And so Americans were hearing it as a hope in dark times for light. But Berlin's story is this. In 1928, he tells, his 3-week-old child died. They buried that child in the cemetery, and every Christmas, because the child died on Christmas Day, every Christmas they would go to the grave and visit, and place stones and probably bring flowers. Berlin wrote the song in response to a yard site that they observed a number of years later in the late 30s, praying and hoping for better times. He used Christmas as a framing for his child's yard site, dreaming of hope when darkness had enveloped his family. So, White Christmas is a very Jewish song. I leave you with that. Have a wonderful evening, and of course, a very white Christmas.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night.